5 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle in a custom gown, my father called to cancel his role in my wedding. His reason was that my sister was crying in a bathroom, feeling insecure about my happiness. My mother backed him up, telling me to walk alone and stop making drama. But on my wedding day, when those grand mahogany doors finally opened, I was not walking alone. And the man holding my arm made my father stand up in the back row in absolute pure cold terror. I am Allison, 33 years old, and a luxury public relations director. Before I reveal the secret that completely destroyed my family facade, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to set ruthless boundaries with toxic relatives who tried to sabotage your joy. It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 5 days before I was set to marry David. David is 35 years old and a brilliant corporate tax attorney with a mind like a steel trap. We were sitting in the living room of our downtown condo, surrounded by seating charts and vendor contracts. We had meticulously planned every detail of our $150,000 wedding, paying for every single cent in cash. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The caller ID flashed the name Richard, my 60-year-old father, a man who ran an import-export business and cared about nothing more than projecting an image of upper-crust wealth. I answered and put it on speaker so David could hear. I expected him to ask about parking arrangements at the country club. Instead, his voice came through the speaker flat and devoid of warmth. "Allison, we have a situation. I am not walking you down the aisle on Sunday." I froze, the pen slipping from my fingers. I looked across the table at David, who immediately set down his highlighter and frowned. "What are you talking about, Dad?" I asked, my voice tight. "Are you sick? Did something I had been conditioned to cater to for 3 decades?" It was Brittany, my 30-year-old sister. She is the undisputed golden child of our family, an aspiring social media influencer whose entire existence revolves around being the center of attention. "She is crying in the guest bathroom right now," my father stated, sounding irritated at me rather than her. "Your wedding is triggering her insecurities." "Triggering her insecurities?" I repeated, truly believing I had misunderstood him. "Dad, it is my wedding week. What could possibly be triggering her?" "She feels overshadowed," Richard explained coldly. "She says your extravagant hotel venue and the massive guest list are deliberately designed to make her look bad. She feels like you are trying to outshine the wedding we threw for her 3 years ago. Therefore, I need to stay by her side during the ceremony to offer emotional support. You will just have to walk yourself down the aisle. Do not make a fuss about it." The sheer audacity of his words knocked the breath out of me. David reached across the table and took my hand, his grip firm and grounding. "Dad," I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level. 3 years ago, when Brittany married Jamal, I spent thousands of dollars on a hideous dress just to appease her. I ran around for 10 hours fixing her makeup, wrangling her guests, and making sure her day was flawless. I stood quietly in the background while you gave a 20-minute toast, calling her the light of your life. Now, 5 days before my wedding, she throws a tantrum in a bathroom, and you are backing out of walking me down the aisle. My father scoffed. "You are being completely unreasonable, Allison. Brittany is highly sensitive. You have always been the cold and calculating one. You do not need emotional support the way she does. You run a PR firm, for crying out loud. You handle pressure every day, your ice forming over my heart. You are punishing me because she cannot handle not being the star of the show for one single afternoon." "Listen to your tone," my father snapped, the anger now palpable in his voice. "This is exactly why your sister is crying. You lack empathy. You have always been selfish, throwing your money around with this ridiculous luxury wedding just to make a point. We are not having this discussion. I am stepping down from the bridal procession, and that is final." David leaned closer to the glowing screen of the cell phone. "Richard," David said calmly, his voice slicing through my father's bluster. "Allison and I have paid for this entire event without your money. We accommodated your guest list. If you pull out now because Brittany is throwing a tantrum, you will embarrass yourself in front of 200 guests." My father sneered through the speaker. "Do not threaten me, David. You might be a hotshot lawyer, but you do not dictate how I handle my daughters. Brittany needs me, and I will not abandon her, because Allison demands a picture-perfect moment. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, realizing that logic would never work with a man who had spent 30 years enabling a narcissist. You are abandoning me, I pointed out. I am teaching you a lesson about family solidarity, he shot back. You need to learn the world does not revolve around your accomplishments. Your sister is in pain. If you cannot be a supportive sister, then you do not deserve a father giving away the bride moment. Just accept the change in plans. Before I could respond to my father, there was a sharp rustling sound on the other end of the line. The phone was snatched away, and my mother's voice pierced through the speaker. Patricia had a unique way of speaking that always made you feel like you were the one losing your mind. Allison, you need to lower your voice and stop acting like such a bridezilla. Patricia scolded, her tone dripping with that manufactured maternal disappointment she had perfected over the decades. To manage a delicate emotional crisis here, and you are throwing a fit over a ceremonial walk. It is highly unbecoming of a woman your age. I stared at the phone, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. I am not yelling, Mom. I am simply stating facts. I am 5 days away from my wedding, and my father is casually dropping out because my 30-year-old sister is throwing a tantrum in a bathroom. It is not a tantrum, Patricia snapped immediately. Brittany is experiencing a severe anxiety attack. She feels entirely inadequate right now, and you are parading your wealth around just to rub it in her face. You know she struggles with self-esteem. Why must you always make everything a competition? David shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing. He leaned toward the phone, but I held up a hand to stop him. This was a battle I had fought my entire life, and I needed to finish it. A competition. I asked, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. Mom, David and I have worked 80-hour weeks for years. We saved diligently. We are paying $150,000 in cash for this wedding. Every single floral arrangement, every catered meal, every hour of the venue rental is coming out of our own pockets. We never asked you for a dime. Money does not buy class. Allison, my mother retorted, entirely missing the point. You are just showing off. It is materialistic, and frankly, it is vulgar. Vulgar. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Let us talk about vulgar, Mom. 3 years ago, when Brittany got married, you and Dad did not pay for a single thing either. But you did not let her pay for it. Instead, you cornered Jamal and emotionally blackmailed him into funding a massive $250,000 spectacle. I heard my mother gasp, but I refused to stop. Jamal is a 34-year-old venture capitalist. He is a brilliant self-made African-American man who worked hard for his wealth, the imported flowers, and the carriage ride, all while you and Dad took the credit in front of your country club friends. David and I are paying for our own wedding with our own money, and you have the nerve to call me vulgar. How dare you bring Jamal into this? Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Jamal is family. He was happy to provide for his wife. Brittany deserves to be treated like a princess. But you are deliberately trying to upstage her. You booked the most expensive hotel ballroom in the city just to make her feel like her wedding was inferior. Her wedding was at a private estate, Mom. It was essentially a royal coronation, I pointed out, maintaining my cold, logical tone. How exactly is my hotel wedding upstaging her? Because you are rubbing your financial independence in our faces, Patricia blurted out. She stopped abruptly, realizing she had said the quiet part out loud. For my mother, my ability to survive and thrive without their financial control was the ultimate insult. They could not threaten to cut funding, so they resorted to emotional sabotage. Patricia quickly cleared her throat, pivoting back to her gaslighting tactics. That is not what I meant. What I mean is that the optics of your event are highly insensitive. It is just too much flash, Allison. It is severely damaging your sister's mental health. She cannot even bear the thought of standing in that opulent ballroom and watching everyone lavish attention on you. Then she can stay home, I said bluntly. If my wedding is so traumatic for her, she is formally uninvited. Problem solved. Dad can walk me down the aisle and Brittany can protect her peace in her own house. Absolutely not. Patricia yelled, her voice echoing shrilly through our living room. We are a family. We appear together. We do not exclude people. If you ban your sister from your wedding, your father and I will not attend either. Logical loops of her argument making my head spin. He will attend, but he will not participate in the procession, Patricia corrected, scrambling to maintain the upper hand. Unless you are willing to make a reasonable compromise for the sake of family harmony. What compromise? David asked, speaking up for the first time since my mother took the phone. His tone was perfectly polite, the exact voice he used when cross-examining a hostile witness during a tax deposition. Patricia seized the opening, clearly believing she had found a reasonable audience in my fiancé. David, thank you for stepping in. You are a sensible man. You must see how out of hand this has gotten. The solution is simple. You need to cancel the hotel ballroom. Cancel the ballroom. 5 days before the wedding, I asked, my voice deadly calm. Yes, Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, completely convinced her logic was flawless. Cancel the grand reception. It is too ostentatious anyway. You can move the entire event to your Uncle Carl's backyard. He has a lovely patio and a decent lawn. We can hire a nice local barbecue caterer. It will be intimate, rustic, and far less threatening to Brittany's emotional state. If you downgrade the venue to a simple backyard barbecue, Brittany will not feel overshadowed. If you do this small favor for the family, then your father will happily walk you down the aisle. The sheer lunacy of the demand hung in the air. My mother was completely serious. She genuinely expected me to throw away a $150,000 non-refundable investment force, 200 formally dressed guests, to eat pulled pork on paper plates in a cramped suburban backyard. Also, my 30-year-old sister would not feel jealous of a hotel ballroom. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto mine. We both knew this was not about wedding aesthetics or sibling rivalry. This was my life to look smaller, cheaper, and less successful than Brittany's carefully curated existence. They were fully prepared to humiliate me in front of my professional peers, my friends, and my new husband's entire family, just to protect the fragile ego of their golden child. A backyard barbecue, I repeated slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of the words settle into the room. I felt no tears threatening to fall. The well of grief for my family had officially run completely dry. No, Mom. I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. We are not canceling the hotel ballroom, and we are not moving my luxury reception to Uncle Carl's backyard to pacify my sister. Patricia gasped loudly. How dare you speak to your mother with that tone? I am offering you a perfectly reasonable solution to save your family from falling apart. Before she could launch another tirade, I heard a scuffle. Richard had snatched the phone back from her. His breathing was heavy, echoing through the speaker of my phone with a rough, aggressive edge. Listen to me very carefully, Allison, my father growled. You have pushed us too far. You think you are so smart with your fancy public relations firm. But you are about to learn what happens when you cross your blood. If you do not comply, your mother, your sister, and I will attend as strangers. We will wear black, sit in the very back row, and watch you walk down that aisle completely alone. Let us see how humiliated you feel then. The line went dead. A harsh, abrupt click filled the silence of my living room. I sat perfectly still. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of city traffic outside. For 33 years, I had dreaded exactly this kind of total rejection. I spent my entire life contorting myself to avoid triggering my family's wrath. I minimized my achievements, hid my financial success, and swallowed countless insults. I had always believed that if I was just accommodating enough, they would eventually love me. But staring at the darkened screen of my phone, the lifelong knot of anxiety in my chest suddenly unraveled. I did not feel the urge to cry. My eyes were completely dry. Instead of the crushing heartbreak I expected, a profound, icy clarity washed over my entire body. The mourning period for the family I always wished I had was officially over. I was no longer a desperate daughter begging for crumbs of affection from a narcissistic mother and a callous father. I was the director of a luxury public relations firm. I managed corporate crises for a living, and my family had just declared themselves a hostile entity. I calmly picked up my wedding planning binder and crossed out Richard, Patricia, and Brittany from the head table seating chart. I reassigned them to the furthest possible corner of the grand ballroom. David watched me execute this task with quiet intensity. He did not offer empty platitudes or pitying hugs. He knew me too well for that. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and let his sharp, legal mind take over the situation. "Something about this does not add up," David said, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He analyzed the interaction precisely the way he dissected fraudulent corporate tax returns. "What do you mean?" I asked, closing the binder. "They are just trying to hurt me. It is their standard operating procedure." "No, Allison, think about it," David insisted, his voice dropping into that focused, analytical cadence he used during high-stakes litigation. "Your father is absolutely obsessed with appearances. His entire identity is tied to looking wealthy, successful, and in absolute control. Why would a man who cares so deeply about high society optics deliberately choose to wear funeral black and sit in the back row of a luxury wedding? It exposes his dysfunction to the exact people he tries to impress." I paused, considering his words carefully. David was entirely right. Richard loved taking credit for my successes. He should have been thrilled to play the proud patriarch at a luxury gala. "And demanding a backyard barbecue," David continued, shaking his head. "That is the most glaring red flag. Your mother hates your Uncle Carl's backyard. She complains about the cheap plastic lawn chairs every single 4th of July. She would never willingly host an event there, let alone a wedding she has to invite her wealthy friends to attend. This entire tantrum from Brittany is a complete smokescreen." "You think they are faking the anxiety attack?" I asked, feeling a new layer of cold realization forming. "I think the anxiety is real, but it has absolutely nothing to do with a hotel ballroom," David replied. "They are trying to force you to cancel the big event. They want you to drastically reduce the guest list, isolate yourself, and hide away in a cheap suburban backyard. They are deliberately staging this explosive fight to make you feel guilty, hoping you will cave to the pressure and pull the plug on the grand reception." "But why?" I asked. "What could they possibly gain by forcing me to cancel my wedding venue?" "They are trying to avoid someone or something at that hotel," David concluded, his voice steady and grave. "Someone on our guest list terrifies them. They are willing to completely destroy their relationship with you to stop it. We need to look at exactly who is RSVPing to this wedding." I pulled out my phone again, my mind racing through the hundreds of confirmed attendees. We had corporate executives and friends from every sector of the city. But as I scrolled through the names, one specific connection jumped out at me like a blaring siren. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train, connecting my parents' sudden desperation to a massive financial web. Just then, my phone buzzed loudly in the palm of my hand. A text from my sister. It was from Jamal, Brittany's fiercely intelligent venture capitalist husband. The timing of his unexpected message was simply too perfect to be a coincidence. The true game was just beginning to unfold. Jamal's text message glowed against the dark backdrop of my living room. I stared at the brief, cryptic words. "Allison, we need to meet. Just us. Coffee at 10 tomorrow morning. Do not mention this to Brittany or your parents. Things are not adding up on my end." I showed the screen to David. His jaw tightened silently, confirming our suspicions. I typed a quick confirmation, agreeing to meet him at a discreet cafe. Setting my phone down, I felt the heavy pressure of a storm gathering. The next morning, 4 days before my wedding, the storm made landfall. I woke at 6 to check my emails. Instead of client updates, my screen was a blinding wall of alerts. My phone had been buzzing relentlessly for hours. My social media and texts were completely flooded. I opened Instagram and saw a post from Brittany. It was a staged black and white photo of her sitting on a window seat, gazing mournfully at the rain, clutching a cup of tea. It was the absolute epitome of manufactured vulnerability. The caption beneath the photo was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. "Sometimes setting boundaries with toxic family members who try to outshine you is the hardest thing you have to do to protect your peace." The post began. "Mental health is a silent battle. When the people closest to you choose shallow materialism and opulent hotel ballrooms over genuine family connection, it breaks your heart. I am taking a step back from certain wedding festivities this weekend to protect my emotional well-being. Thank you to my incredible parents for standing by my side and prioritizing my anxiety over a selfish display of wealth. Remember to cut out toxicity even if it shared it. She had launched a preemptive strike painting herself as the fragile, abused victim of my supposedly monstrous materialistic ego. She completely omitted the fact that I was paying for everything myself. She deliberately framed my independence as a weapon forged specifically to attack her. Within seconds of her post going live, the flying monkeys began their assault. These flying monkeys were my extended relatives who orbited my parents and fed off their fabricated drama. My text inbox was a digital firing squad. Aunt Carol sent a massive paragraph. Allison, I am disgusted by your behavior. How could you be so cruel? Your mother is beside herself. Cancel that hotel immediately and apologize. My cousin Greg was next. Seriously, Allison, you are going to let a fancy party destroy your relationship with your only sister. Grow up and stop being such a narcissist. Message after message poured in each one, echoing the exact same rehearsed narrative my parents had carefully planted. They called me heartless. They called me toxic. They demanded I bend the knee, cancel my wedding venue, and beg for forgiveness for daring to have a celebration that my sister did not personally control. In the past, reading these vicious messages would have sent me into a spiral of panic and self-doubt. I would have spent hours drafting long, desperate apologies trying to explain my side of the story, begging them to see the truth. But as I sat in my quiet bedroom watching the vitriol fill my screen, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, surgical precision. The old Allison, the eager-to-please daughter, was dead. The luxury public relations director was fully in charge. In the corporate world of crisis management, when a hostile entity launches a coordinated smear campaign, you do not engage in an emotional mudslinging contest. You do not negotiate with terrorists, and you absolutely do not hand over the microphone by validating their access to your platform. I did not type a single defense. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not shed a tear. I simply opened my contacts and began implementing the first phase of my ironclad boundary. Aunt Carol, block. She would not get another second of my time. Cousin Greg, block. He was always a pawn anyway. Uncle Carl, block. I moved through the list with methodical, ruthless efficiency. I blocked their phone numbers. I blocked their social media profiles. I restricted their access to my email. Within 10 minutes, I had electronically eradicated my entire extended family from my existence. The digital silence that followed was profoundly beautiful. I got out of bed, showered, and dressed in my sharpest tailored suit. I applied my makeup with a steady hand, secured my hair, and walked out the door. When I arrived at my public relations firm, I strode past the reception desk with absolute focus. My team was already waiting in the main conference room for our morning briefing. "Good morning, everyone," I said, taking my seat at the head of the long glass table. My voice was crisp and commanding. "We have a major product launch for our top client tomorrow, and I want zero distractions. I am treating my personal life like a hostile corporate takeover, and my family is currently the opposing counsel. Do not put through any calls from anyone sharing my maiden name. If they show up at the lobby, security is to escort them off the premises immediately." My team nodded, accustomed to my direct leadership style. I compartmentalized the impending wedding disaster with frightening ease. I directed client campaigns, approved press releases, and managed multi-million-dollar budgets without breaking a sweat. Every time my mind tried to drift back to Brittany's pathetic Instagram post or my father's cruel threats, I visualized a heavy steel vault locking those thoughts to attend my wedding offering, to cancel the ballroom just to stop the public humiliation. But they had vastly underestimated the monster they created. By treating me like a corporate enemy, they had forced me to fight back using the only language they respected: absolute total annihilation. As the clock on my wall edged closer to 10 in the morning, my focus shifted entirely to the upcoming coffee meeting with Jamal. Whatever secret he had stumbled upon, I knew Jamal held the key to destroying my family's facade. I grabbed my designer coat, adjusted my posture in the reflection of the glass doors, and walked out of the building to meet my brother-in-law, ready to arm myself for war. The discreet corner cafe was located just 3 blocks from my public relations firm. It was a dark, quiet establishment favored by corporate executives who needed to conduct off-the-record discussions. As I pushed through the heavy wooden doors, my eyes immediately scanned the dimly lit room. I spotted Jamal sitting at a small table tucked away in the back booth. He was dressed in a sharp-tailored charcoal suit, his posture rigid and commanding. Jamal was a highly successful African-American venture capitalist who evaluated multi-million-dollar startup pitches for a living. He had built his vast fortune by reading people, detecting inconsistencies, and trusting hard data over emotional manipulation. He was not a man easily fooled. I approached the table with my guard fully raised. I fully expected him to be another emissary sent by my parents to scold me about Brittany's fragile mental state. I braced myself for a lecture on family harmony and sisterly duties. I took a steadying breath, preparing myself internally, ready to deliver a cold professional shutdown. Jamal stood up as I approached, extending a hand rather than offering a familial hug. I appreciated the professional boundary. I took his hand, noting the seriousness. Jamal said, his voice low and incredibly focused. "Please have a seat. I ordered you a black coffee." I slid into the leather booth, keeping my designer purse on my lap like a protective shield. I looked him dead in the eye, wasting absolutely no time on pleasantries. "Jamal, if you are here to tell me about Brittany's sudden devastating anxiety over a hotel ballroom, you can save your breath. I am not canceling my wedding venue, and I am not negotiating with emotional terrorists. If my parents want to boycott my wedding to comfort her, they are more than welcome to stay home." Jamal did not blink. He did not look angry. Instead, a heavy, exhausted sigh escaped his lips. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished wooden table. "I am not here to defend my wife," Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of the usual protective warmth he reserved for Brittany. "I saw her ridiculous Instagram post this morning. I know exactly how she operates when she wants attention. I am a venture capitalist, Allison. I look for patterns, and the patterns in your family are screaming at me. I am not here to convince you to change your wedding plans. I am here because the math is not mathing, and I need you to give me a straight answer." My defensive posture faltered slightly. The sheer intensity in his dark eyes caught me completely off guard. He was not acting like a devoted husband blindly defending his wife. He was acting like an investor who had just discovered a massive discrepancy in a financial audit. "What do you mean the math is not mathing?" I asked, my voice dropping to match his serious tone. Jamal looked around the quiet cafe to ensure no one was listening. He took a slow sip of his espresso before locking his gaze onto mine. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Yesterday evening, your parents came over to our house for an emergency dinner." Jamal began, measuring every single word carefully. "Brittany had been distraught. They told me that you and David had made a terrible financial mistake. They said you had booked a luxury hotel ballroom that you absolutely could not afford just to show off to David's wealthy corporate colleagues." I stared at him, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I did not interrupt. I needed to hear exactly what narrative my family had concocted. "Brittany told me you were drowning in credit card debt for this wedding." Jamal continued, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of deep suspicion. "She sat on our couch weeping and said you were begging your parents for cash to cover the final vendor deposits. According to your father, you were on the verge of total bankruptcy, and the hotel was threatening to cancel your entire wedding by Friday if you did not pay the remaining balance." The sheer audacity of the lie hit me with a physical force. My parents had not just called me selfish. They had fabricated an elaborate, desperate story about my financial ruin. They were painting me as a pathetic, materialistic failure who had bankrupted herself for a party. "Is that true?" Jamal asked, his dark eyes piercing right through my shock. "Are you and David drowning in debt? Are you begging Richard and Patricia for a financial bailout to save your wedding?" I sat perfectly still. The cafe around me seemed to fade into a blur. I thought about the $150,000 sitting safely in our joint checking account. I thought about the vendor receipts all paid in full months ago. I thought about the fact that I had not asked my parents for a single dime since I was 18 years old. The realization that my family had sat in Jamal's living room and orchestrated this massive, calculated lie was staggering. They had weaponized my wedding, inverted the truth, and portrayed my independence as a catastrophic failure. They had used my supposed desperation to manipulate Jamal. But why Allison? Jamal pressed his voice down my voice. It emerged as a cold, sharp blade. Jamal, David, and I have paid for 100% of our wedding. Every single cent was paid in cash. We do not have a single dollar of credit card debt. The hotel was paid in full 6 weeks ago. I have not asked my father for money, and I certainly never begged him for a bailout. They are lying to you. Jamal closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. A muscle in his jaw jumped. When he opened his eyes again, the look of betrayal in them was absolutely terrifying. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. He was no longer just a concerned brother-in-law. He was a man who realized he had been played. If you are not begging them for money, Jamal whispered, his voice dangerously soft, then we have a massive, massive problem. I leaned across the table, my corporate crisis instincts kicking into overdrive. What did they do, Jamal? Why would they lie to you about me needing a financial bailout? Because Jamal replied, his voice practically vibrating with suppressed rage. 2 weeks ago, your father came to me in private. He begged me for a wire transfer to save you from complete public humiliation. He told me he needed to protect his little girl. And Allison, I gave it to him. The silence between us grew deafening. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly clicking into place, forming a picture of deception so vile it took my breath away. The fake anxiety attack, the demand for a backyard barbecue, the desperate lies about my bankruptcy. It was all a carefully constructed smokescreen. I reached into my designer purse, my fingers finding the cold metal of my phone, absolutely ready to pull out the undeniable proof that would blow my family's entire toxic world wide open. I pulled my phone from my designer purse, unlocked the screen with steady fingers, and immediately opened so the bright screen sat directly under Jamal's intense gaze. Look at the numbers, Jamal. I commanded, my voice completely devoid of any hesitation. Look at the joint checking account David and I share. Look at the credit card balances. Every single one is sitting at a perfect 0. I swiped to the next screen, bringing up my dedicated wedding budget spreadsheet, which was linked directly to our bank statements. Here are the vendor invoices. The hotel ballroom was paid in full 6 weeks ago. The florist, the high-end caterer, the string quartet. Every single expense is completely zeroed out. I have not missed a single payment, and I have absolutely never faced any threat of cancellation from any vendor. Jamal stared at the glowing screen. His dark eyes darted back and forth across the undeniable digital proof of my financial stability. I watched his broad shoulders stiffen. The muscles in his neck jumped as he clenched his jaw. He reached out and scrolled through the transactions himself, his thumb swiping through months of responsible cash-based payments. He was searching for a lie, but finding only the absolute truth. You did not ask Richard for a financial bailout? Jamal whispered, his voice sounding hollow as if the air had been violently sucked from his lungs. You did not call him 2 weeks ago crying because the hotel was threatening to sue you for breach of contract. I have never cried to my father about money in my entire adult life, I replied firmly. I am 33 years old. I direct a successful luxury public relations firm. David is a corporate tax attorney. We do not bounce checks, Jamal. My father fabricated that entire crisis. Why would he tell you the hotel was going to sue me? Jamal pushed my phone back across the table. He leaned back in the booth and ran a large, shaking hand down his face. Because 2 weeks ago, Richard came to my office unannounced. He looked complete and actually shed tears. He told me you and David had vastly underestimated the cost of a luxury wedding. He claimed you were hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars in secret credit card debt from David, and that the stress was pushing you toward a nervous breakdown. My stomach churned with pure disgust. The depth of my father's deception was staggering. He used my impending marriage to portray me as a reckless, hysterical woman hiding financial ruin from her own fiancé. He weaponized the very concept of mental health to manipulate my brother-in-law. What exactly did he ask you for? I demanded, the icy rage crystallizing in my veins. He asked for $300,000. Jamal said, the words falling like concrete blocks onto the table. He called it an emergency bridge loan to save your dignity. He said if David found out about your secret debt, he might call off the wedding. Richard begged me to wire the money directly to his personal holding account. He insisted that he would personally handle paying off your aggressive creditors and the hotel management so you would not have to suffer the ultimate humiliation of bankruptcy. The silence that descended upon our small corner of the cafe was deafening. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. $300,000. My father had extorted nearly $250,000 from Jamal, using my name, my wedding, and my reputation as collateral. You transferred the money, I stated. It was not a question. I am a venture capitalist, Allison Jamal said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. I manage millions. 300,000 is a drop in the bucket to protect my family from public ruin. I love Brittany. I thought I was protecting her sister. I wired the funds the very next morning. Richard assured me he would pay me back with interest once his next international sharp, humorless laugh. There were no aggressive creditors, Jamal. There was no secret debt. David manages our household taxes. He sees every penny I spend. My parents concocted a massive, elaborate lie to steal your money. And now I know exactly why they are trying to force me to cancel my wedding venue and move the reception to Uncle Carl's miserable backyard. Jamal narrowed his eyes, his sharp, analytical mind rapidly catching up to the psychological warfare at play. Why, he asked. Because if I hold my wedding at a 5-star hotel, you will be there. I explained the entire twisted puzzle, finally assembling itself perfectly in my mind. You will be sitting at the head table. You will have a few drinks. You will lean over to me or David, and you will say how glad you are that we pulled off the event despite the financial trouble. You will mention the $300,000 bailout, and the second you open your mouth, their entire scam will blow up in their faces. Jamal inhaled sharply, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They need you to cancel the wedding, he said softly. Exactly, I confirmed. If I cancel the grand reception and retreat to a cheap backyard barbecue in shame, it perfectly fits the narrative they sold you. It proves to you that I really am broke. It permanently prevents you from ever talking to David about the hotel bill. This is about Richard concealing wire fraud, Jamal said, clenching his fists. He stole $300,000. We need to go to David's law office right now. I will not let your father get away with this deception. We will expose every single lie. We left the cafe immediately and took a private car straight to David's law firm in the financial district. The ride was silent, both of us mentally preparing for the legal warfare ahead. David was a senior partner at a top-tier corporate tax firm operating out of a sleek corner office on the 40th floor. When Jamal and I strode past the reception desk and closed David's heavy oak door behind us, David took one look at our faces and knew the wedding crisis was merely the tip. I told him about the manufactured anxiety attack, the fake bankruptcy story, and my parents' desperate push for a backyard barbecue to keep me isolated. Then Jamal stepped forward and delivered the killing blow. Richard extracted $300,000 from me via wire transfer, Jamal stated, handing David his phone to display the digital confirmation receipt. He claimed it was an emergency loan to save Allison from aggressive wedding vendors and protect her from public humiliation. David did not display shock. His expression shifted instantly into the cold, calculated demeanor of a predatory tax attorney. He took Jamal's phone, scrutinized the routing numbers, and then turned to his multiple desktop monitors. This was not routed to Richard's personal checking account, David said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. This routing number belongs to a commercial holding account. Jamal, you previously injected a $2 million venture capital investment into Richard's import-export business, correct? Yes, Jamal confirmed, pacing the length of the office. $2 million for a 20% equity stake to expand his shipping logistics across Southeast Asia. He provides me with quarterly financial summaries showing steady, modest growth. David let out a sharp, cynical laugh. Corporate tax evasion is my specialty, Jamal. Let us see what Richard's public corporate filings actually say when a forensic expert takes a look. David logged into his secure legal databases, pulling up state incorporation records, federal tax lien registries, and commercial property deeds. For 20 tense minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid clicking of David's keyboard and the hum of the city traffic far below. I watched the screens fill with complex spreadsheets, corporate flowcharts, and banking registries. Finally, David stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, staggering. "Your $2 million investment never went toward shipping logistics," David announced, turning his monitor so Jamal and I could see the highlighted red flags. Richard has been utilizing a classic layering technique. He set up 4 different offshore shell entities registered in the Cayman Islands. He is funneling corporate revenue out of the primary business account and into these untraceable shells using fake vendor invoices. Fake vendor invoices. Jamal repeated, his hands gripping the back of my chair. "Explain exactly what you mean." "Look at these expense reports," David commanded, pointing to a column of numbers. Richard's business is claiming massive quarterly expenditures for overseas freight storage. But the companies billing him for these storage fees do not exist. They are shell corporations registered to a post office box. He is essentially billing his own company for phantom services, paying those fake invoices with your venture capital money, and moving the cash offshore. I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of absolute disgust. My father, the man who constantly berated me for my career choices, was running a sophisticated financial scam. "And what about the $300,000 he took from me last week?" Jamal demanded. "That wire transfer constitutes textbook federal wire fraud," David explained, pulling up a different legal document. Richard used a deceptive narrative regarding Allison's wedding to solicit funds across state lines via electronic transfer. But more importantly, as a majority shareholder and operating officer of a company you invested in, he has committed a severe breach of fiduciary duty. He is intentionally bleeding the primary company dry. "So, the business is bankrupt?" I asked, piecing the horrible reality together. "Worse than bankrupt," David said grimly. "There are massive reporting gaps in his federal filings for the past 3 years. Cash into these offshore accounts. The company is completely hollowed out. If his creditors call in their debts today, the entire import-export business collapses instantly." Jamal's dark eyes flashed with an intense burning fury. "I am going to destroy him. I am going to freeze his remaining operating capital and drag him through federal court until he has nothing left but the suit on his back. We will absolutely destroy him." David agreed, his voice deadly and precise. "But we will do it the right way. We are going to compile a comprehensive evidence dossier. I am going to prepare an IRS Form 3949-A. That is the official information referral form used to report suspected tax fraud, including false exemptions, organized tax evasion, and failure to pay tax. Once the IRS Criminal Investigation Division gets a hold of this paper trail, they will freeze all of his domestic assets, seize his commercial properties, and initiate a full federal audit. They will lock him up," Jamal stated, a predatory satisfaction creeping into his voice. "Federal prison is highly likely for wire fraud of this magnitude," David confirmed. "But the timing of this execution is everything. If we confront Richard right now, he will panic, attempt to shred the remaining physical documents, and possibly try to flee the country using the offshore cash he has already hidden. We need to lock down the trap completely before we pull the trigger." I sat perfectly still, digesting the monumental shift in our reality. My parents were not just toxic narcissists, they were desperate, cornered criminals. They had tried to force me to cancel my wedding and hide in a backyard to prevent Jamal from speaking to David and uncovering this massive financial crime. They were willing to sacrifice my entire life to protect their illegal operation, my voice turning to pure ice. "Give me 48 hours to secure the digital footprints and draft the federal reporting documents," David replied, closing his laptop with a definitive snap. "I am going to trace every single fake vendor invoice and map out the exact web of offshore shell entities. He is leaving a glaring digital trail that leads straight to a federal indictment. My venture capital firm has a forensic accounting team on retainer," Jamal said, his tone calculating and ruthless. "I will have them run a shadow audit on Richard's business operations immediately to see how much of my $2 million investment was illegally diverted. Make sure your forensic team operates completely under the radar, David warned. We cannot afford to trigger any automated alerts on Richard's commercial banking accounts. If he suspects we are looking into the ledgers, he will start moving the remaining liquidity. We have to keep him totally oblivious until we are ready to strike. I stood up from the leather guest chair, feeling a dark, empowering surge of absolute clarity. My entire life, my family had meticulously gaslit me, manipulated me, and treated my hard-earned success as a pathetic joke. Now they were actively trying to ruin my wedding day to conceal their own catastrophic failures. They want a dramatic family performance, I said, looking between the two brilliant men standing in the office. They want to wear black, sit in the back row of my luxury reception, and watch me walk down the aisle completely alone. They want to humiliate me in public to maintain their own twisted sense of superiority. Jamal turned from the window, his eyes narrowing with lethal intent. So we give them exactly what they want, he proposed. We let them think they have completely broken you. We let them attend the wedding thinking their terrible secret is perfectly safe. Exactly, I agreed, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. We do not confront them today. We do not answer their passive-aggressive completely normal. We let them walk into my 5-star hotel ballroom wearing their funeral attire. We let them take their seats in the back row fully believing they have won the ultimate power struggle. David stepped around his large mahogany desk, picking up the printed documentation of the fake vendor invoices. And while they are sitting there basking in their own manufactured drama, we unleash absolute financial devastation, David concluded. By the time they realize they have walked directly into a massive legal ambush, it will be far too late for them to run. I looked at Jamal, seeing the unwavering support and shared fury in his expression. We had the financial weapons. We had the legal authority. Now we just needed the perfect stage for the execution. David turned back to his monitors. He needed to follow the digital path of the $300,000 wire transfer Jamal authorized 2 weeks ago. The money landed in the holding account, but David tracked its ultimate destination. Jamal paced the length of the office. Realizing his in-laws played him for a fool was tearing his pride apart. Look at this, David commanded. He had bypassed another layer of corporate obfuscation. I stood next to Jamal, staring at the complex flow of digital transactions. David highlighted a specific sequence of transfers. The money did not stay in the holding account for more than 48 hours, David explained. Richard used structured transfers to avoid federal reporting triggers. He funneled the cash through the Caymans, then immediately wired it right back onto domestic soil. Where did it go? Jamal demanded, his voice thick with tension. Did he pay off the commercial vendors? No, David said quietly. The business is completely bankrupt. There is zero operating capital left. Richard did not use a single dime of your loan to save his company. He routed the entire $300,000 into a private domestic. Is your wife? Jamal froze. The silence in the office became absolute. Brittany? I asked, feeling a fresh wave of nausea. Why would my father launder this money just to hand it to Brittany? David brought up a new screen accessing public court records tied to Brittany. Because Brittany is drowning in debt. David revealed, his voice clinical. I do not mean typical credit card debt. I mean high-stakes, devastating financial ruin. Jamal grabbed the back of the leather chair, his knuckles turning white. Show me the expenditures, Jamal ordered. Show me what my wife has been doing with the money I invested. David opened a series of financial disclosures tied to the trust. The numbers were staggering. There were dozens of wire transfers directed to luxury casinos in Las Vegas. She has a massive gambling addiction, David stated. She has been taking weekly trips to Vegas. Look at the dates. Jamal stared at the screen in pure horror. She told me those were influencer trips, he whispered. She said she was attending wellness retreats. I completely funded her travel expenses. I paid for her first-class flights and luxury hotel suites. She was hitting the high-limit tables, David confirmed. But the gambling is only half the problem. Look at these retail accounts. The screen displayed a horrifying list of unpaid balances at high-end luxury boutiques. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt for designer handbags and diamond jewelry. My sister, the golden child who lectured me about my vulgar display of wealth, had been living a complete lie. She maintained her flawless Instagram aesthetic by racking up massive debt. Your father has been using his company as a personal slush fund to cover her illicit activities, David explained. Richard and Patricia could not let their precious golden child face the consequences of her actions. They could not let the country club find out that their perfect bled the family business dry to pay her debts. And when they ran out of corporate funds, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm, "They used me." "Exactly," I said, the magnitude of the betrayal settling heavily in my chest. "They manipulated you into investing $2 million into a hollow company. When Brittany burned through that money, they needed an immediate cash injection to keep her out of legal trouble. So they used my wedding. They fabricated a crisis about me going bankrupt to extort another $300,000 from you." Jamal turned away from the monitors. He walked over to the large window overlooking the city, bracing his hands against the glass. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. "My entire marriage is a financial facade," Jamal said. "Brittany played the fragile wife who just wanted a simple life. Richard and Patricia played the proud parents. They welcomed me into their home, they called me a son, and the entire time they were looking at me as nothing more than an automated teller machine. They used my wealth to fund her addiction and cover their crimes. They treated you exactly how they have always treated me," I told him. "They do not see us as family, Jamal. They see us as resources. They extract what they need and they discard the rest." We now understood the complete picture. The fake anxiety attack over my hotel ballroom was a desperate, calculated maneuver. Richard and Patricia knew Jamal would be attending my luxury wedding. They knew he would mingle with David, a corporate tax attorney. They were absolutely terrified that if we all sat together and started sharing stories, the lie about the $300,000 bailout would instantly collapse. "They needed me to cancel the wedding," I murmured. "They needed me to hide away in a cheap suburban backyard because a humiliating event would prevent Jamal from ever talking to David." It was the only way they could keep the gambling. Shock had vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, predatory resolve that mirrored my own. The venture capitalist who had built an empire from the ground up was officially awake, and he was ready for blood. "I am going to cut her off," Jamal declared, his eyes merciless. "I am going to freeze every single joint account. I am going to cancel her platinum cards, and I am going to serve her with divorce papers so fast her head will spin. She wants to play the victim on social media. I will give her something real to cry about." Jamal reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen, ready to initiate the call that would scorch the earth. I could see the muscles in his jaw ticking. He was seconds away from dialing Brittany and unleashing a tidal wave of fury that would alert Richard and Patricia to our discovery. David moved with the calculated speed of a litigator. He stepped forward and placed his hand over Jamal's phone, pressing it down toward the mahogany desk. "Wait," David commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "If you call your wife right now, you blow our only advantage. She will immediately panic and call Richard. The second Richard knows we have uncovered the fake vendor invoices and the offshore shell accounts, he will initiate a digital scrub. He will destroy the ledgers, move the cash out of the Cayman entities, and attempt to flee the jurisdiction. We cannot give him a head start. We need airtight federal evidence before you make a move." Jamal glared at David, betrayal radiating from his rigid posture. "I am not going to play house with a woman who uses my marriage as a cover for her gambling addiction. I refuse to shake Richard's hand and call him family while he bleeds my investment dry to fund her retail debts. I am driving to their house right now to confront them." I stood rooted to the spot, listening to their heated exchange. My mind was racing, shuffling through the events of the past week like a high-speed. I had seated Jamal and Brittany alongside three of Jamal's elite venture capitalist partners. I placed Richard and Patricia at the adjacent table, surrounded by high-profile corporate executives and wealthy investors. The final piece of the psychological puzzle snapped into perfect clarity. The truth hit me with such intense physical force that I braced my hand against the guest chair. "Jamal, stop," I said, my voice echoing with icy certainty. "It is not just about you and David comparing notes. It is about your business partners." Both men turned to look at me, their arguments halting. I looked into Jamal's eyes. Think about the guest list for Sunday. You invited 3 top venture capitalist partners. These are brilliant men who operate in the same high-stakes financial circles as you. Richard and Patricia know they are attending. They know David's colleagues from the corporate tax firm are attending. My parents are terrified. They are not boycotting my wedding because Brittany feels sensitive about a grand hotel ballroom, I explained. They are boycotting because they are terrified of being in a room filled with financial titans. If you, David, and your partners start mingling at the cocktail hour, the conversation will inevitably turn to business. My father knows that if he stands in that opulent ballroom, someone might casually mention the $300,000 wedding loan. He knows his entire fabricated bankruptcy story will unravel in minutes. David nodded slowly, the horrific brilliance of my parents' strategy dawning. That is why they demanded you cancel the hotel and move the wedding to a suburban backyard. They wanted to physically isolate the key players and drastically shrink the audience. They deliberately created an emotional crisis to force my hand. I continued. They wanted me to cancel the large reception and retreat into Uncle Carl's backyard in total shame. They calculated that if I would avoid speaking to anyone. Jamal would pity me for being a financial failure. David would be furious about the ruined wedding, and the truth about their federal wire fraud would remain safely buried under a pile of manufactured family drama. They were perfectly willing to destroy my milestone and humiliate me publicly, all to build a protective fortress around their crimes. Jamal gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. The sheer evil of their calculation was almost too much to process. They weaponized your big day to cover their tracks. I am not waiting. I am going to tear their entire world apart today. No, I said, stepping right in front of him. My voice was no longer that of a grieving daughter. It was the voice of a woman who had finally been pushed past the point of no return. You are not going to confront them today, Jamal. He stared down at me, his chest heaving with anger. Why should I give them another minute of peace? Because I want them to feel exactly what they tried to make me feel. I declared, locking eyes with him. I have spent 33 years watching my parents prop Brittany up on a pedestal while they treated me like a worthless afterthought. I have spent my entire life swallowing their insults to keep the peace. They pushed me to the edge, expecting me to break. Now I am going to break them. I turned to David, who was watching me with respect. We let them play their roles, I instructed smoothly. We do not answer their angry text messages. We do not engage with the flying monkeys on social media. We let them believe their toxic manipulation worked perfectly. We let them put on their black clothes, march into my wedding, and sit in the back row thinking they won the power struggle. Jamal slowly released his grip on the desk, a dark, understanding smirk replacing the blind fury on his face. You want to trap them publicly. I want to trap them in all the cards. We execute this on my wedding day. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in silent, synchronized warfare. While my parents and Brittany continued to bombard my phone with passive-aggressive text messages about family loyalty, we were entirely consumed by the logistics of their total destruction. Patricia sent me long paragraphs about how I was breaking my father's heart by being so stubborn. She claimed that my refusal to move my wedding to Uncle Carl's backyard was proof of my underlying narcissism. Every time my phone vibrated with another one of their delusional complaints, my resolve hardened into an impenetrable block of ice. I did not shed a single tear. I only felt a cold surgical precision. Jamal did not return to the sprawling estate he shared with my sister. Instead, he booked a private suite under an alias at a luxury hotel downtown, citing back-to-back venture capital meetings to keep Brittany completely oblivious. Jamal approached his task with the calculated coldness of a man who had just discovered his entire marriage was a fraudulent transaction. He looked at the bank statements documenting Brittany's exorbitant casino debts, and I saw a chilling void form in his eyes. There was no sadness left in him, only a burning desire to deliver absolute consequences. He moved with the ruthless efficiency that had made him a titan in the investment world. His first directive was absolute severance. Working alongside his personal wealth managers, he systematically untangled every digital thread, connecting his massive fortune to Brittany. He secretly revoked her access to his primary offshore holdings and transferred the bulk of his liquid assets into heavily guarded trusts she could not touch. He also instructed his legal team to prepare a comprehensive lawsuit against Richard demanding the immediate repayment of the stolen $300,000 plus punitive damages. The paid consumer accounts. He identified her two primary platinum credit cards, the ones she used to fuel her catastrophic gambling binges in Las Vegas and purchase her endless supply of designer handbags. He did not cancel them outright, knowing a declined card at a boutique would trigger an immediate panic call to Richard. Instead, he set a localized digital freeze. The cards would continue to work for small, insignificant purchases like coffee or gas, keeping her completely sedated and unaware. But any transaction over $50 would trigger an automatic delay. While Jamal was methodically cutting off the financial oxygen supply, David transformed our home office into a legal war room. The dining table that had once been covered in elegant floral arrangements and delicate seating charts was now buried under stacks of commercial property deeds, falsified vendor invoices, and banking registries. I sat beside him, acting as the ultimate project manager. I used my public relations background to organize the data chronologically, ensuring that the narrative of their fraud was impossible to misinterpret. David did not sleep. He drank black coffee and drafted the most comprehensive lethal dossier of federal crimes I had ever seen. We printed physical copies of the most damning evidence, placing them into a sleek black folder that David would carry with him to the wedding venue. He filled out the IRS Form 3949A with clinical precision, attaching hundreds of pages of undeniable evidence detailing Richard's organized tax evasion and his failure to report offshore income. David carefully structured the legal narrative to prove that my father had intentionally breached his fiduciary duty to his investors. He mapped the exact flow of the stolen $300,000, tracing it from Jamal's venture capital firm, through the dummy corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, directly into the private domestic trust used to pay off Brittany's gambling debts. He compiled the digital signatures, the routing numbers, and the corresponding dates, creating an impenetrable wall of evidence that no defense attorney could ever dismantle. It was a beautiful, terrifying piece of legal architecture designed specifically to result in a federal indictment. But the true genius of our plan lay in the execution. We knew that if we confronted them early, they would run. If we handed them the evidence on a random Tuesday, they would have time to hire damage control experts, spin a new narrative, and empty their remaining bank accounts. We needed them trapped in a public setting where they could not scream "run" or call for their lawyers without humiliating themselves in front of the exact high society peers they worshipped. We needed a digital dead man's switch. Everything was ready. We were prepared. Sitting together in David's office on Thursday night, just 3 days before the ceremony, we coordinated the timing down to the precise second. Jamal contacted his private banking liaisons and set a synchronized block on every single account tied to Brittany. He programmed the absolute freeze to take effect on Sunday at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At that exact moment, every credit card in her wallet would become a useless piece of plastic. All joint checking accounts would be locked, and a formal notice of legal separation would be automatically emailed to her personal inbox alongside an immediate eviction notice from all properties owned solely by Jamal. Simultaneously, David finalized his digital assault. He loaded the massive dossier of tax fraud and wire extortion into an encrypted email server. He addressed the files directly to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, copying the federal prosecutor's office and Richard's remaining corporate creditors. David then programmed the secure server to release the emails at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Finally, he drafted a separate direct email to my father, attaching the IRS reporting forms and the wire fraud evidence, ensuring Richard would know exactly who had driven the final nail into his coffin. I watched the countdown timer initiate on the bright screen, feeling absolutely no guilt. The trap was perfectly set. Everything was now perfectly aligned for their absolute ruin. Sunday morning arrived with sunshine pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the bridal suite. The space was a masterpiece of opulent design featuring vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and expansive mirrored walls. Makeup artists and hairstylists moved around me with quiet, practiced efficiency, laying out rows of expensive cosmetics and styling tools on the marble vanity. My bridesmaids hummed with excited energy as they sipped mimosas from crystal flutes. They believed they were preparing me for the happiest day of my life. They had absolutely no idea that I was actually preparing for a public execution. I sat perfectly still in the plush velvet makeup chair staring at my reflection. My hair was being pinned into an intricate updo, and a makeup artist was applying a soft, neutral palette to my face. I looked calm. I looked radiant. I looked entirely undisturbed by the fact that I was about to detonate a financial nuclear bomb on my own blood relatives in front of 200 wealthy guests. The magnitude of the impending destruction should have made me anxious, but my resting heart rate remained steady. The trap was locked, the timers were set, and all I had to do was play my role flawlessly until the clock struck 3. My phone, resting face up on the cool marble vanity, vibrated. Even on the morning of my wedding, my mother could not resist twisting the knife one final time to ensure I felt small and inadequate. I picked up the device and opened the message, my eyes scanning the harsh, manipulative words she had typed. "We are on our way," the text read. "It is a real shame you chose pride over family today. We could have had an intimate gathering at your uncle's house, but you had to be selfish. Brittany is still incredibly fragile, but we are bringing her anyway to support you. I hope you enjoy your lonely walk down the aisle." I stared at the message, dissecting the layers of toxic manipulation woven into every sentence. In the past, reading those exact words would have triggered a panic attack. I would have locked myself in the bridal suite bathroom, ruined my professional makeup with desperate sobs, and frantically texted her back with long apologies. I would have begged her to see my perspective, begged her to understand how much her rejection hurt, and begged my father to change his mind and walk with me. I would have let them completely hijack my emotional state and ruin my entire wedding morning. But today, staring at the screen, I did not shed a single tear. My vision remained perfectly clear. My breathing did not hitch. The familiar crushing weight of daughterly guilt was absent, replaced by a smooth, impenetrable armor of absolute indifference. I watched the cursor blink on my screen, feeling the power of finally being completely immune to their emotional terrorism. I tapped the glass screen and composed my reply with terrifying clinical politeness. I did not defend my choices. I did not mention her cruel jabs. I simply typed, "Cannot wait to see you there." The seating arrangements are exactly as you requested. I hit send and set the phone back down on the marble counter. I knew exactly how that message would land. Patricia would read my cheerful, compliant response and smile, believing her gaslighting had worked. She would show the text to Richard and Brittany, and they would all congratulate themselves on successfully breaking my spirit. They would walk into the luxury hotel ballroom feeling invincible, completely unaware that I had just cemented them into their assigned seats at the back of the room, right within striking distance. As the stylist finished pinning my veil into place, I looked into my eyes in the mirror. My mind drifted back through the decades of my childhood. I remembered every time my parents had called me cold, unfeeling, and robotic. Whenever I did not react to their outbursts with the required level of compliance, they labeled me unloving. Whenever I pointed out their inconsistencies using simple logic, they accused me of lacking empathy. They weaponized my rationality, telling me I was a difficult, unnatural daughter who could never measure up to the warm, emotional, and sensitive nature of their golden child, Brittany. They used the word cold as a weapon to make me feel defective. But sitting in that bridal suite adorned in white silk and diamonds, I finally embraced the trait they despised. They were right about me. I could be ruthlessly cold. But my coldness was not a defect. It was a defense mechanism forged in the fires of their narcissistic abuse. And today I was using coldness to protect the people who actually mattered to me. I was using it to protect David, the brilliant tax attorney who loved me without conditions, and Jamal, the loyal brother-in-law they had so casually exploited and defrauded. I stood up from the velvet chair, smoothing my hands down the lace bodice of my custom gown. The silk trailed behind me as I walked toward the suite's bay window, looking out over the city skyline. At exactly 3 o'clock, the digital triggers David and Jamal had set would execute. The offshore accounts would lock, the federal tax evasion dossiers would transmit to the Internal Revenue Service, and Brittany's platinum credit cards would instantly decline. My bridesmaids gathered around me, adjusting my train and handing me my cascading bouquet. They smiled, telling me it was time to head down to the staging area outside the grand ballroom. I tightly gripped the stems of the fresh white orchids, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline course through my veins. The mourning period for the family I had lost was now completely finished. The executioner had finally arrived. I turned toward the suite doors, ready to walk down the aisle and deliver the final blow. From my own concealed vantage point on the mezzanine balcony overlooking the grand ballroom entrance, I watched the execution of their pathetic performance unfold. The luxury hotel staff had transformed the venue into an absolute masterpiece of modern elegance. Towering arrangements of white hydrangeas and orchids framed the heavy mahogany double doors. 200 distinguished guests wearing sharp tuxedos and elegant evening gowns mingled politely as they presented their invitations to the impeccably dressed ushers. The atmosphere was a blend of high society sophistication and joyful anticipation. Then the heavy glass doors at the front of the lobby spun open, and the toxic trio made their highly calculated entrance. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany did not walk into my wedding venue. They marched into it like a conquering army arriving at a funeral. Their wardrobe choices were a deliberate, vicious statement designed to drain the joy from the room. My father wore a stark, heavy black suit with a solid black tie, looking ready to deliver a eulogy rather than celebrate his daughter. My mother walked beside him in a severe black crepe dress, her face arranged in a mask of stoic tragedy. But it was Brittany who took the performance to a new level of absurdity. She wore a floor-length, long-sleeved black role of the traumatized victim with sickening precision. An usher approached them with a warm, welcoming smile, holding a stack of embossed seating charts. He politely offered to escort the parents of the bride to the reserved front row seating by the altar. Richard simply held up a right hand, completely ignoring the young man. "We know exactly where we are sitting," my father stated loudly, ensuring that several nearby guests heard his sharp, dismissive tone. Without another word to the hotel staff, my parents and my sister bypassed the floral archway and headed straight for the grand ballroom. They bypassed the front rows reserved for family. They bypassed the middle sections filled with colleagues of David and my public relations team. They marched all the way to the very last row of chairs positioned right next to the exit doors. It was the furthest point from the altar. It was a physical manifestation of emotional abandonment. They sat down in unison, forming a dark, brooding wall of disapproval. Patricia immediately pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse and began dabbing at dry eyes. Richard sat with his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in a rigid line of manufactured defiance. Brittany took the aisle seat perfectly, positioning herself to be seen by every guest who turned around. She crossed her arms, tilted her chin upward, and allowed a cruel, victorious smirk to spread across her face. As the ballroom continued to fill with our 200 guests, the visual anomaly of the immediate family of the bride wearing funeral attire in the back row created a ripple of discomfort. The wealthy executives and venture capitalists taking their seats could not help but notice the hostility radiating from that back corner. Whispers began to circulate. Guests exchanged confused glances. The carefully curated elegance of the room was suddenly poisoned by the thick, palpable tension my family had intentionally introduced. Brittany noticed the attention and capitalized on it. She leaned over to a woman seated in the row ahead of her, a client from my public relations firm. "We are just supporting from afar due to her toxic behavior," Brittany whispered loudly enough for several rows to hear. She let out a very dramatic, heavy sigh. It is a very difficult day for our family. Her materialistic obsession with this luxury hotel has shattered our mental health. We are only here to fulfill our biological duty, but we must protect our peace from her demands. The client shifted uncomfortably, offering a polite but confused nod before turning away. Brittany smiled, looking pleased with her toxic narrative. She leaned back in her chair, waiting for the main event. She was waiting for the music to change. She was waiting for me to step through those heavy mahogany doors alone. She wanted the entire room of people to watch me make the long, humiliating walk down the aisle without a father to give me away. She wanted my independence to look like isolation. From the mezzanine balcony, I watched Richard check his expensive watch. I saw Patricia whisper something into his ear, and both of them let out a quiet, condescending laugh. They believed they had hijacked my wedding. They believed their psychological warfare had broken me, forcing me to surrender my dignity just to have them present in the building. They thought their smear campaign had isolated me from any meaningful support. The grand ballroom doors were sealed shut. The ushers directed the last guests to their seats and took their places by the entrances. The ambient chatter of 200 people slowly faded into a respectful hush. At the front of the room, the string quartet finished tuning their instruments. The cellist slowly raised his wooden bow, and the first notes of the processional music filled the vast, echoing space. The tension in the air became electric. Every guest in the room turned their head toward the back of the hall, their eyes fixing on the heavy mahogany doors. Wealthy investors, the sharp attorneys, and the executives all waited in silent anticipation. In the back row, my father leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed eagerly on the doors, ready to feast on my public embarrassment. Brittany adjusted her black velvet dress and smirked, practically vibrating with pure excitement. They were waiting to see the cold, unfeeling daughter swallow her pride and walk down that long aisle alone. They were expecting a defeated, utterly broken woman. They were about to witness a spectacular public execution today, and they had absolutely no idea. The string quartet shifted their tempo, moving into the soaring notes of the processional. I stood in the dim corridor just behind the heavy mahogany doors. The muffled sound of the cellos bled through the thick wood. The music swelled, lifting the atmosphere in the grand ballroom to a magnificent crescendo. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side. The 200 seated guests were twisting in their velvet chairs, craning their necks toward the entrance. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd as the heavy oak doors remained firmly closed for just a beat too long. In the very back row, Richard leaned back in his chair. I could perfectly picture the deeply satisfied, arrogant grin spreading across his face. He was eagerly waiting to watch his daughter endure the ultimate public humiliation. He imagined the doors swinging open to reveal a pathetic, abandoned bride forced to make a lonely, pitiful march down the long aisle without her father. Patricia was undoubtedly clutching her black purse, ready to perform a fake sympathetic sigh. Brittany was likely preparing to capture the moment on her phone to document my isolation. Sharp footsteps echoed against the polished marble floor. I turned to my right. Jamal stepped out of the shadows, walking with the heavy, measured stride of a corporate titan, preparing for a hostile takeover. He stopped right beside me. He did not look like a man whose marriage was rapidly collapsing. He looked like a man who held the absolute keys to an empire. He wore a flawless, custom-tailored black Tom Ford tuxedo. The sharp cut of the expensive fabric accentuated his commanding presence. His dark eyes locked onto mine, burning. "Are the digital triggers locked?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper over the swelling music. "The offshore accounts are frozen," Jamal replied, adjusting his platinum cufflinks with absolute precision. "The federal tax evasion dossier is queued on David's secure server. Brittany's credit cards will decline at exactly 3 o'clock. They walked right into a slaughterhouse, Allison. Now let us give them a show they will never forget." I nodded, wrapping my hands tightly around the stems of my fresh white orchids. Jamal stepped slightly ahead of me and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the 2 hotel ushers standing by the brass handles of the mahogany doors. The ushers grasped the handles and pulled. The doors slowly swung open outward. A brilliant flood of warm golden light poured from the grand ballroom into the dim staging corridor. I stepped forward into the threshold. I knew I looked breathtaking. The custom white silk of my gown caught the light, the intricate lace bodice gleaming under the massive crystal chandeliers. But the collective audible gasp that violently ripped through the room was not just for my beauty. The shockwave that paralyzed the entire venue was triggered by the undeniable fact that I was not walking alone. Jamal stepped squarely into the light right beside me. He offered his arm to me with absolute, undeniable authority. I slid my hand through his arm, resting my fingers against the crisp, expensive fabric of his tuxedo sleeve. We stood united in the doorway, a towering visual representation of power, wealth, and unyielding solidarity. The murmurs in the crowd instantly died. A stunned, suffocating silence slammed down over the grand ballroom. The elite corporate executives, sharp tax attorneys, and high-profile venture capitalists all stared toward the doorway in absolute bewilderment. They knew Jamal. They respected his fierce financial acumen. They were fully aware that Jamal was Richard's son-in-law, married to the golden child, currently sitting in the back row. Seeing the wealthy, commanding African-American investor proudly taking the place of the father dressed in funeral black was a massive social earthquake. It completely destroyed Richard's narrative in a single second. I kept my chin high, my posture rigidly perfect, and let my gaze sweep deliberately to the back corner of the room. The psychological devastation was instantaneous and glorious. Richard's smug, satisfied grin vanished, as if it had been violently wiped from his face. All the color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair tightly. He half stood, instinctively wanting to stop the procession, but he was completely paralyzed by the hundreds of high-profile guests watching his every move. Patricia let out a sharp, genuine gasp, her hand flying to her throat as if she were actually choking on the reality unfolding in front of her. She frantically looked around, realizing that her wealthy peers were witnessing her husband being publicly replaced by the son-in-law she constantly manipulated. But Brittany's reaction was the true masterpiece. The cruel smirk melted off her face, replaced by pure horror. She went entirely rigid in her chair. Her eyes widened into panicked saucers behind her dark sunglasses. She stared at her own husband, the man who funded her extravagant lifestyle and covered her massive gambling debts, proudly escorting the sister she despised. Confusion, terror, and absolute shock warred across her pale features. She looked frantically from Jamal to Richard, desperately trying to understand why her husband had deliberately crossed enemy lines. She had no idea that her financial oxygen supply was permanently severed. Jamal squeezed my arm, anchoring me to the present moment. His posture radiated lethal protective power. Head high, Jamal whispered, his voice a low, steady rumble that only I could hear. We take the room. We own the narrative. Let them choke on it. I smiled, a genuine expression of triumph. The string quartet shifted into the main processional melody. We took our first synchronized step forward, leaving the threshold and stepping onto the pristine white aisle runner. We were walking directly toward the back row, moving like an incoming tidal wave. Every single eye in the grand ballroom tracked our movement. The heavy, rhythmic melody of the string quartet seemed to amplify the crushing gravity of the moment. Jamal set a slow, deliberate pace. He did not rush. He forced the entire room to witness his total endorsement of me. The crisp white fabric of my custom gown swept across the polished floor, catching the brilliant light from the massive crystal chandeliers above. With every step we took, the oppressive narrative my family had spent 33 years constructing fractured a little bit more. I felt a profound electric energy radiating from Jamal. He was a human shield of absolute authority, projecting a silent warning to anyone who dared to intervene. The guests seated in the front rows, the elite corporate tax attorneys from David's firm, and the billionaire venture capitalists from Jamal's network began to murmur in quiet appreciation. They did not see a discarded, humiliated daughter. They saw a triumphant, powerful bride escorted by one of the most respected financial minds in the city. The contrast between my radiant composure and the funereal misery of my biological family, sitting in the back row, became the unspoken spectacle of the century. I kept my chin perfectly level, my posture flawless, but my eyes remained entirely locked on my father. Richard was completely unraveling in real time. The smug, arrogant grin that had plastered his face just moments ago had been entirely eradicated. The blood rushed from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. For a man who obsessed over control and public optics, watching his wealthy son-in-law proudly usurp his patriarchal role was the ultimate psychological torture. I watched his large hands grip the padded armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. His instinct to dominate took over. Richard planted his feet and half stood from his velvet chair. His jaw clenched, his chest heaving under his heavy black suit. I knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to march into the center of the aisle, grab my arm, and demand that Jamal step aside. He wanted to violently reassert his authority and force the narrative back into his hands. But he could not move. He was absolutely paralyzed by the heavy, suffocating weight of his own social ambitions. He looked to his left and saw three of the most powerful investors in the state watching him intently. He looked to his right and saw highly connected corporate executives raising their eyebrows at his disruptive movement. If he caused a scene now, if he screamed or instantly destroyed, the wealthy peers he desperately needed to impress would label him unhinged. Richard slowly sank back down into his seat, completely defeated and physically trapped by the very audience he had tried to use against me. Beside him, Patricia was faring no better. My mother let out a sharp, audible gasp that echoed slightly over the music. She frantically clutched her hand over her chest, her fingers digging into the dark fabric of her severe black dress. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, reading the faces of the high society guests. She could hear the quiet whispers. She could feel the collective judgment shifting away from me and landing squarely onto her. For decades, Patricia had successfully gaslit everyone around her. She had spun endless tales about my supposed selfishness, my coldness, and my constant need to victimize my sister. But the visual evidence unfolding before her peers completely destroyed her lifelong smear campaign. The crowd did not see a toxic bridezilla. They saw a woman being honored by a fiercely loyal family member. Patricia realized in that exact moment that her carefully crafted social mask had slipped, exposing the ugly, vindictive reality underneath. She shrank back into her chair, her manufactured maternal superiority dissolving into pure, unadulterated panic. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to Brittany. My 30-year-old sister sat completely frozen, her body rigid with a terror so profound it almost radiated off her skin. She gripped her black designer handbag like a life preserver, but it offered absolutely no protection from the tidal wave of consequences rushing toward her. Her wide, panicked eyes darted frantically from me to the man holding my arm. She simply could not comprehend why her husband, the man she manipulated and used as an endless automated teller machine, was walking her despised sister down the aisle. Her entire reality was short-circuiting. She tried to make eye contact with Jamal. She leaned forward slightly silently, begging him to look at her, hoping to find some trace of a misunderstanding or a simple explanation. Jamal did not even blink in her direction. He kept his gaze locked straight ahead, his jaw set like carved granite. He looked straight through her, as if she were completely invisible, as if she were nothing more than a minor obstacle on our path to the altar. The absolute dismissal in his posture struck Brittany like a physical blow. The cruel, victorious smirk she had worn just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, sinking realization that she had lost complete control over her financial savior. I radiated pure, unadulterated triumph. Every step we took was a heavy strike against the prison they had built for me. I felt the warm, solid presence of Jamal beside me, confirming that chosen family is infinitely stronger than blood. We were closing the distance rapidly now. The long white aisle runner was coming to an end. We were approaching the final rows of seating where my father, my mother, and my sister sat in their self-imposed darkness. The moment of execution was finally at hand, and I was ready to deliver the killing blow without an ounce of mercy. As we closed the final few feet between the grand mahogany doors and the first row of seating, the heavy scent of Patricia's signature floral perfume hit my senses. They were sitting right on the aisle, positioned perfectly to inflict maximum visual damage, but their strategic placement had backfired spectacularly. Now they were trapped in the front line of our retaliation. The rhythmic glide of my silk gown against the polished marble floor matched the steady, thumping heartbeat in my chest. I kept my eyes locked on the altar ahead where David stood, but my peripheral vision captured every microscopic twitch of panic radiating from the three figures dressed in funeral black. Richard was practically vibrating with suppressed rage, his face a mottled canvas of gray and furious red. Patricia had her hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically toward the wealthy venture capitalists seated a few yards away, terrified they were witnessing her public dethroning. Brittany had shrunk so far back into her velvet chair that she looked like a cornered animal trying to merge with the upholstery. She was desperately gripping the armrests, her dark sunglasses unable to hide the sheer terror rigid on her lower face. We reached the edge of their row. The music from the string quartet swelled, filling the cavernous ballroom with a rich, soaring melody that completely masked any ambient noise. Right as we aligned perfectly with Richard and Brittany, Jamal did something that was not on the standard wedding rehearsal schedule. He stopped. It was not a clumsy hesitation or a fearful falter. It was a sharp, calculated, and perfectly executed halt. The sudden break in our forward momentum forced the attention of everyone nearby directly onto us. I paused right beside him, maintaining my flawless bridal composure, gripping my white orchids with steady hands. Jamal slowly turned his head to the left, angling his gaze downward to pierce through the fragile facade of my biological family. He looked dead into Richard's wide, bloodshot eyes, and then his fierce, dark gaze slid over to meet Brittany's terrified stare. Jamal did not raise his voice. He did not create a scene that the hotel staff or the distant guests would notice. He leaned his towering frame down just an inch, bringing his face dangerously close to the people who had treated him like a disposable banking account. When he spoke, his voice was a lethal quiet rumble, carrying the chilling finality of a judge delivering 7 words was catastrophic. I watched my father stop breathing. His jaw dropped open, a silent gasp caught entirely in his throat as the true meaning of the message short-circuited his brain. He knew David was a corporate tax attorney. He knew Jamal was a financial titan. The realization that they had collaborated and uncovered his offshore shell entities hit him with the force of a physical strike. Brittany let out a tiny, high-pitched whimper, her hands instantly dropping from the armrests, to fumble frantically for the designer clutch in her lap where her phone was stored. Jamal did not wait to watch them scramble. He did not grant them another millisecond of his attention. Having delivered the absolute financial kill shot, he straightened his posture, looked straight ahead, and guided me forward. We resumed our walk down the pristine white aisle runner, completely ignoring the silent horror rapidly detonating behind us. We stepped past their row, leaving them choking on their own manufactured toxicity, treating them as nothing more than invisible ghosts in a room full of vibrant life. My heart soared. The heavy chains of obligation, guilt, and manipulation that had bound me to those 3 people for over 3 decades simply evaporated into the air. I was walking toward my future, and I was leaving the rotting corpse of my past squarely in the dust. The hundreds of guests watching our procession saw nothing but a confident bride being escorted by a fiercely protective brother-in-law. They had absolutely no idea that a massive federal tax evasion scheme and a devastating marital separation had just been initiated in the back row. At the end of the long aisle, David stood waiting beneath a breathtaking arch of white hydrangeas. His hands were clasped in front of him, and the look of immense pride and deep, unwavering love on his face took my breath away. He had watched the entire execution unfold from the altar, knowing exactly what Jamal had whispered, and perfectly calculating the financial destruction that was currently hitting their inboxes. As we reached the front of the room, Jamal came to a smooth halt. The string quartet gracefully faded their music into a soft, romantic hum. Jamal turned to face me. He did not give me a generic obligatory hug. He looked me in the eyes, offering a silent nod of profound respect, acknowledging the brutal war we had just fought and won together. Then, with supreme confidence, Jamal placed my hand directly into David's awaiting palm. It was the ultimate handoff, a transfer of loyalty and protection that entirely bypassed the man in the back row who had arrogantly refused the job. David squeezed my fingers tightly, anchoring me to my new reality. "You look absolutely stunning," David murmured, his eyes shining with fierce triumph. We turned together to face the officiant. The grand ballroom was perfectly silent, bathed in golden light, and filled with the supportive gaze of our chosen community. The officiant smiled warmly and began the opening remarks of the ceremony. Her voice resonated clearly across the opulent space, speaking of love, trust, and unbreakable partnerships. The ceremony began flawlessly, a beautiful, sacred event, completely untainted by the frantic, silent panic tearing my biological family apart in the darkest corner of the room. I stood at the altar, surrounded by luxury, deeply in love, and completely free. As the officiant spoke about the foundation of a strong marriage requiring absolute transparency and unwavering support, my mind briefly checked the clock. It was 3 minutes past the hour. While David and I held hands, gazing into each other's eyes, a silent, catastrophic implosion was taking place exactly 100 feet behind us. I did not need to turn around to know what was happening. I could feel the tectonic shift in the room. The air felt lighter, charged with a beautiful, vindicating energy. In the very back row, tucked against the heavy oak exit doors, Brittany's black designer handbag began to vibrate. She slipped her phone out of the clutch, desperate for any distraction from my moment of glory. Her bright screen was a chaotic waterfall of automated banking alerts. The notifications stacked up with ruthless, undeniable speed. Her primary platinum credit card reported an immediate status change to permanently closed. Her secondary card, the one she used exclusively for high-limit tables at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, showed an identical permanent suspension. The joint checking account she shared with Jamal, her bottomless well of luxury funding, flashed a zero available balance with a bright red banner indicating a total administrative freeze. The automated teller machine was permanently out of service. But the financial block was merely the opening act of her destruction. Her personal email inbox chimed with a high-priority message marked with a red exclamation point. The sender was Jamal's wealth management firm. The subject line read, "Notice of legal separation and immediate eviction." As Brittany opened the PDF document, the cold, clinical legal jargon stripped away her entire manufactured identity. She was ordered to vacate their primary luxury residence and surrender all property keys within 24 hours. Her status as a pampered wife had been legally revoked while she sat trapped in a velvet chair. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. She stared at the illuminated screen, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to make a single sound. Without cause, Richard felt the distinct sharp buzz of his own smartphone in the breast pocket of his heavy black suit. Annoyed by his daughter's sudden silent hyperventilating, he pulled out his device, fully expecting a minor work emergency. He tapped the screen to open a message dispatched directly from David's prestigious corporate tax firm. The sender was David himself, and the attached files were incredibly heavy. Richard opened the first document and felt the blood freeze solid in his veins. It was a perfectly executed IRS Form 3949A, explicitly detailing massive corporate tax evasion. The second attachment contained the exact wire transfer routing numbers for the $300,000 he had extorted from Jamal, matched perfectly to the Cayman Islands shell entities. Every fake vendor invoice and hidden ledger he had carefully buried was laid out in undeniable digital proof. The email text was brief and utterly merciless. It stated that all attached files had already been transmitted to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, the Federal Prosecutor's Office, and Richard's remaining commercial corporate creditors. Richard was staring directly at a guaranteed federal indictment. He was legally, professionally, and financially dead. The import-export business he used to project his upper-crust status was entirely gone. The country club memberships and luxury cars all evaporated in seconds. He gripped his phone so hard the glass screen nearly cracked under his heavy thumb. The realization that his own son-in-law had orchestrated this lethal strike from the altar completely paralyzed him. He was facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud, and he could not even stand up to defend himself. Patricia looked back and forth between her husband and her golden child. She saw Brittany trembling uncontrollably, clutching her phone to her chest, as if she had been physically shot. She saw Richard staring blankly into the distance, his face devoid of all color, his chest frozen in a state of absolute terror. Patricia aggressively whispered, asking them what was wrong, but neither of them could form a coherent sentence. They were trapped in a silent nightmare, forced to sit perfectly still in a room full of their wealthy peers, while their entire lives burned to the ashes. The social constraint she valued above all else became the cage that kept her silent. Meanwhile, at the altar, David gently squeezed my hands, bringing my focus entirely back to him. I looked into his eyes, seeing the brilliant, protective man who had flawlessly executed my defense. It was time for our vows. I spoke my promises with a clear, ringing voice that echoed beautifully through the grand ballroom. I promised to honor, protect, and cherish him through every challenge life could offer. I pledged my absolute loyalty to the family we were building together right in that exact moment. David responded with words that carried a profound, powerful dual meaning. He promised to always stand as an impenetrable shield against anyone who tried to cause me harm. He vowed to protect my peace, my heart, and my future. His voice was steady, resonant, and filled with a fierce devotion that brought genuine tears of joy to my eyes. We exchanged our heavy platinum rings, officially sealing our permanent partnership. The officiant smiled radiantly, raising her voice to address the grand ballroom. She officially pronounced us husband and wife, inviting David to kiss his bride. David pulled me close and kissed me deeply, wrapping his arms around my waist. The entire ballroom erupted into thunderous, joyful applause. The wealthy executives, the sharp tax attorneys, and the venture capitalists rose to their feet, delivering a massive standing ovation for our new union. And in the very back row, surrounded by the deafening cheers of the high society crowd, they so desperately wanted to impress Richard, Patricia, and Brittany remained firmly glued to their seats, utterly ruined, completely paralyzed, and entirely forgotten. Entering the bridal suite felt like stepping into a sanctuary. The cocktail hour was in full swing below, filled with the clinking of crystal glasses and elated guests. I stood in the center of the suite while two attendants helped me out of my heavy ceremony gown and into a sleek silk reception dress. The restrictive weight of the past 33 years vanished. I took a deep breath, savoring my victory. That peace lasted exactly 15 minutes. The heavy double doors of the bridal suite did not just open. They were violently shoved apart, slamming against the wallpaper with a harsh crack. The two attendants gasped and stepped back. I turned around slowly, smoothing my dress. Standing in the doorway, stripped of their carefully curated high society masks, were Richard, Patricia, and Brittany. The funeral black attire they had worn to spite me now seemed appropriate for the massacre of their lives. The smug arrogance was gone. The condescending superiority had evaporated. They looked like cornered animals. Brittany pushed past our mother, her face blotchy and stained with ruined mascara. The designer sunglasses were gone, revealing eyes wide with pure panic. She lunged forward, stopping a few feet away from me, her chest heaving for air. "What did you do to my husband?" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical shriek. Her hands balled into tight fists. He completely cut me off. "My platinum cards are declining. The joint checking accounts are frozen. I have a legal notice of eviction in my inbox. I have absolutely right now." I stared at her, feeling icy detachment. The sister who spent my entire life stealing my joy, mocking my career, and manipulating our parents was standing before me, completely broken. She was demanding I fix the consequences of her own degenerate gambling addiction. I did not do anything to your husband, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Your husband finally looked at his financial statements. He realized his flawless wife was blowing hundreds of thousands of dollars at casino tables and funding her fake internet lifestyle with his venture capital. Jamal made his own choices. I merely provided the venue for his realization. Richard pushed past Brittany, his heavy black suit looking rumpled and disheveled. The imposing wealthy patriarch who threatened me over the phone just 5 days ago was completely gone. He looked desperate, sweating, and terrifyingly pale. Allison, call off your husband right now. Richard demanded, his voice shaking with undeniable fear. You tell David to retract those emails. You tell him to recall the Internal Revenue Service reporting forms immediately. I am your father. You cannot send federal authorities after my commercial business. You are destroying my entire life over a stupid wedding dispute. A stupid wedding dispute, I echoed, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. The heels of my shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. You stole $300,000 from Jamal. You committed federal wire fraud using my name and my wedding as a fabricated crisis. You laundered that money through offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands to cover your golden child's illicit debts. David is a corporate tax attorney. He does not retract federal fraud reports, Dad. He files them. You destroyed your own life the second you decided to treat Jamal like an automated teller machine. Patricia grabbed Richard's arm, her face twisted in a mask of genuine horror and desperate manipulation. Allison, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. We share the same blood. If the federal prosecutors investigate your father, we will lose the house. We will lose the country club memberships. We will be absolutely ruined. You have to stop this. You have to fix this. Brittany is having a breakdown. We are all having a breakdown. Please show some compassion. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who spent decades calling me cold, robotic, and unfeeling. I looked at the woman who snatched the phone from my father 5 days ago and demanded I cancel my luxury wedding venue to pacify a crying 30-year-old. I stood perfectly straight, letting the absolute zero temperature of my soul radiate outward. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I looked directly into Patricia's desperate, pleading eyes and delivered the final devastating blow. Go solo, I stated softly, repeating her exact words from that horrific phone call. Stop making drama. Protect your mental health. Patricia recoiled as if I had physically struck her across the face. She let out a soft, strangled sob. You told me my boundaries were selfish. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the 3 ruined figures standing in my bridal suite. You told me to hide my success so Brittany would not feel overshadowed. You demanded I handle my problems alone. So now you can handle your federal indictments, your massive casino debts, and your impending bankruptcies completely alone. Do not bring your drama into my wedding reception. Brittany let out another wailing sob, sinking to her knees right there on the pristine floor of the bridal suite. She buried her face in her hands, crying for the luxury lifestyle she had just permanently lost. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, completely unable to formulate a defense against his own financial crimes. He finally understood that I possessed zero empathy for their self-inflicted destruction. You are monsters, Patricia whispered, her voice trembling with absolute defeat. No, Mom, I replied smoothly. We are just the people you underestimated. Now get out of my bridal suite before I have hotel security drag you out through the service elevator. The 3 of them stood frozen in the opulent room, entirely paralyzed by the crushing weight of their immediate downfall. The grand facade they had spent a lifetime building was officially reduced to ash. Before the toxic trio could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, the suite door swung open a second time. David and Jamal stepped into the room, moving with synchronized predatory grace. They walked directly to my sides, flanking me like twin pillars of absolute destruction. The power dynamic in the room entirely shifted. My parents and my sister physically recoiled from the united front we presented. David adjusted his tie, fixing his gaze on Richard. He did not look like a new son-in-law trying to keep the peace. He looked like a seasoned corporate tax attorney who routinely dismantled fraudulent empires before breakfast. Did you really think you could launder $1/3 of $1 million through my wife's fake wedding crisis? And a tax attorney would not find the paper trail, David asked. His voice was a calm, resonant blade that sliced through the heavy silence. Richard swallowed hard. He raised a hand, attempting to summon his authoritarian bluster. You have no idea what you are talking about, David. That was a private family loan. It is a civil matter between Jamal and me. You have no legal standing to involve federal authorities. David let out a humorless chuckle. A private family loan, he repeated, taking a step toward my father. Let us clarify the legal definition of what you actually did, Richard. You used an electronic communication network to Title 18 United States Code Section 1343. It is federal wire fraud, and it carries a 20-year prison sentence. Patricia gasped, gripping his arm for support. But you did not stop there. David continued, his voice dropping into a relentless clinical cadence. Once Jamal transferred the funds, you did not use a single cent to pay off any aggressive wedding vendors. You funneled the capital through 4 separate offshore shell entities registered in the Cayman Islands. I traced every single fake invoice you generated. You build your own bankrupt import-export business for phantom storage fees to move that cash. You systematically drained the primary operating accounts, intentionally blinding your investors and explicitly violating your fiduciary duties. I am a businessman, Richard sputtered, beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Businesses move liquidity all the time to cover operational deficits. You cannot prove fraudulent intent. I do not have to prove intent to your corporate board. David shot back, his eyes flashing with lethal intensity. I already forwarded the entire digital footprint to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. You failed to report those offshore transfers. You grossly misrepresented your taxable income to the federal government for 3 consecutive years. You used the stolen venture capital to replenish a domestic trust solely dedicated to covering your daughter's catastrophic casino debts. When the federal auditors freeze your assets tomorrow morning, they will not be looking for operational deficits. They will be looking for tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering. Richard sagged backward, his shoulders collapsing as the absolute certainty of his ruin finally penetrated his thick skull. The arrogant patriarch who had threatened to humiliate me by wearing black and sitting in the back row was completely obliterated. He was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, and he knew he had absolutely no defense against the overwhelming digital evidence. While David dismantled my father, Jamal turned his attention to the weeping figure on the floor. Brittany was still on her knees, clutching her useless designer handbag, her face buried in her hands. She peeked through her fingers, looking up at the man who had funded her entire artificial existence. Jamal. Please, Brittany, begged her voice, a desperate, high-pitched whine. Please do not do this to me. I have a sickness. I need help. I will go to a rehabilitation center. We can fix this. You promised to love me through sickness and health. Do not leave me with absolutely nothing. Jamal looked down at her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He did not hand them to her gently. He dropped the heavy stack directly onto the marble floor right in front of her knees. The loud smack of the paper hitting the stone echoed sharply through the bridal suite. Those are your divorce papers, Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of the warmth he used to reserve for her. You did not just have a sickness, Brittany. You orchestrated a massive financial extortion campaign against my firm. You sat on my couch and cried fake tears about Allison going bankrupt while you were secretly funneling my investment capital to blackjack tables in Las Vegas. I was scared, Brittany sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of his trousers. I was in too deep. Dad said he would handle it entirely. You used my wealth to build a fake social media empire. Jamal continued, stepping back to avoid her grasp. You belittled your sister. You called her toxic and selfish to your entire audience, all while you were stealing from me to pay for your luxury boutique binges. I revoked your platinum cards. I froze your checking accounts. The eviction notice you received is legally binding. You have 24 hours to retrieve your clothes from my property before the locks are permanently changed. Brittany let out a pathetic wail, grabbing the divorce papers and clutching them. She looked up at him with wild, frantic eyes. "Where am I supposed to go, Jamal? I do not have any money. I do not have a job. How am I supposed to survive like this?" Jamal stared down at her, his expression now utterly merciless. "You wanted to outshine your sister," Jamal said, delivering the exact phrase we had planned. "Now you can do it from a studio apartment." The stark brutality of Jamal's statement hung in the air, finalizing the utter collapse of my sister's manufactured universe. As Brittany wailed on the marble floor, Patricia finally realized that her usual tactics of gaslighting and social maneuvering were completely useless. The corporate jargon and financial evidence had stripped away all her defenses. She could no longer pretend this was a simple misunderstanding or a bridezilla throwing a tantrum. She was staring directly at the federal imprisonment of her husband and the absolute destitution of her golden child. Patricia collapsed against Richard, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place. For the very first time in my 33 years of life, I saw my mother cry genuine, uncalculated tears. They were not tears of manipulation to win an argument. They were tears of profound, inescapable terror. "Allison, please!" Patricia begged, her voice cracking as she reached out a trembling hand toward me. "You have made your point. You have proven you are the smartest one in the room. But you cannot do this. We are blood. We are your family. You cannot send your own father to a federal prison. You cannot leave your sister homeless on the street. Please, I am begging you as your mother, have some mercy. Do not destroy this family." Investments. I did not step forward to comfort her. I did not feel a single drop of the suffocating guilt that had dictated my entire existence. The emotional shackles were completely shattered. "I am not destroying this family, Mom," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute crystalline authority. "I am simply handing you the mirror. You are looking at the reflection of your own greed, your own deceit, and your own catastrophic choices." Richard looked away, unable to meet my eyes, but I kept my gaze firmly locked onto my mother's weeping face. For 33 years, I continued my words striking like hammer blows in the quiet suite. For 33 years, I was the designated scapegoat of this household. I was the emotional dumping ground for every single insecurity you and Dad possessed. When I achieved something on my own, you diminished it. When I paid my own way, you called me vulgar. You demanded I shrink my life, my ambitions, and my happiness, just so Brittany could maintain her delusion of superiority. You conditioned me to believe that my only value in this family was my compliance and my silence. Brittany sobbed louder, curling into a tight ball on the floor, but I ignored her entirely. "You demanded loyalty, but you offered none in return," I said, taking a slow step forward. "When you realized Brittany had gambled away her life, you did not hold her accountable. You chose to commit federal wire fraud. When you needed a cover story to steal $300,000, you weaponized my wedding. You looked me in the eye 5 days ago and threatened to humiliate me on the most important day of my life. You dressed in funeral black and sat in the back row to publicly punish me for a crime I never committed. You thought I would just sit down and take it because that is what I have always done." Patricia lowered her hand, her shoulders shaking violently. "We were desperate, Allison. We did not want to lose everything." "You did not want to lose your country club status," I corrected her sharply. "You were willing to sacrifice my marriage, my reputation, and Jamal's entire financial future just to keep your ugly secrets hidden. You gambled everything on the assumption that I would be too weak to fight back. But you miscalculated. You created this disaster entirely on your own. I did not commit tax evasion. I did not forge vendor invoices. I did not gamble away hundreds of thousands of dollars at luxury casinos. You built a house of cards, and now you are begging me not to let the wind blow." Richard finally found his voice, though it was weak and raspy. "Allison, I am sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please tell David to stop the federal reporting. Give me a chance to pay Jamal back. I will sell everything. Just do not let me die in a federal cell." I looked at my father, the man who had ordered me to go solo down the aisle, the man who had sneered at my independence and laughed at my pain. "You told me to learn that the world does not revolve around my accomplishments," I replied, throwing his exact words back at him with lethal precision. Now you get to learn that the world does not revolve around your deceit. David does not negotiate with tax evaders. Jamal does not finance liars, and I no longer protect toxic abusers. You reap exactly what you sow. I turned away from the three weeping, ruined figures. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt an overwhelming, beautiful emptiness where the trauma used to live. David offered me his arm, his eyes filled with immense respect and fierce love. Jamal stood tall beside us, adjusting his jacket completely unbothered by the sobbing woman on the floor. "Let us go back to our wedding," I said, looking up at my husband. "We have a reception waiting, and I want to celebrate with my real family." We walked toward the heavy double doors of the bridal suite. I did not look back. I did not hesitate. David pushed the doors open, and the vibrant, joyful sounds of the ballroom washed over us. We stepped out of the darkness and into the bright golden light, leaving Richard, Patricia, and Brittany trapped in the absolute ruin of their own making. The heavy doors closed behind us with a loud final click, permanently sealing away my past and opening up my very beautiful, highly victorious future. 6 months have passed since those heavy mahogany doors clicked shut on my wedding day. In the corporate crisis management world, we call the period following a major detonation the fallout phase. For my biological family, the fallout was an absolute unmitigated catastrophe. The digital snare David and Jamal had so brilliantly set snapped shut with bone-crushing force, completely dismantling the fraudulent empire my parents had spent their entire lives building. Richard did not escape the federal authorities. 48 hours after my wedding reception, agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division raided his commercial warehouse and his lavish corporate office. They carried out dozens of boxes filled with the exact physical ledgers David had highlighted in his federal report. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were immediately frozen and repatriated by federal prosecutors. His import-export business was entirely liquidated to pay off his massive roster of defrauded creditors. Today, Richard is no longer the smug, arrogant patriarch sitting in the back row of luxury hotel ballrooms. He is currently confined to a tiny rented apartment under strict federal house arrest, wearing an ankle monitor, while he aggressively awaits his criminal trial for multiple counts of wire fraud and severe tax evasion. He is facing a mandatory minimum of 15 years in federal prison. David ensures I receive all the public docket updates, allowing me to watch the legal system systematically hold my father accountable for his greed. Patricia suffered total social annihilation. When the news of Richard's impending indictment broke across our city's financial sector, her carefully curated high society facade completely evaporated. The elite country club where she had spent decades judging others and flaunting her manufactured wealth formally revoked her membership. I heard through the grapevine that her access card was publicly declined at the front gate. The wealthy friends she desperately tried to impress instantly turned their backs on her, treating her like a contagious disease. She is now an absolute pariah, completely isolated in her shame, wandering the aisles of discount grocery stores and aggressively avoiding eye contact with the women who used to attend her lavish dinner parties. She has absolutely no one left to manipulate and no wealth left to weaponize. And then there is Brittany. The golden child finally plummeted back to reality with a devastating crash. Jamal executed his legal separation with the same ruthless, predatory efficiency he uses to conquer the venture capital markets. He legally evicted her from their luxury estate within 24 hours of my wedding. Without Jamal's massive financial oxygen supply, Brittany's fake social media influencer lifestyle died overnight. Her luxury vehicles were repossessed. Her designer wardrobe was seized and auctioned off to settle her catastrophic Las Vegas casino debts. Today, the sister who once demanded I cancel my 5-star wedding venue to protect her fragile ego is working a minimum wage retail job at a local shopping mall. She spends 40 hours a week folding discounted sweaters and standing behind a cash register completely stripped of her platinum credit cards and her unearned arrogance. Jamal did not give her a single cent in the divorce settlement, citing her massive financial fraud and her documented gambling addiction. He cut her out of his life like a malignant tumor. As for my life, the contrast could not possibly be more beautiful. The toxic, suffocating fog that clouded my first 33 years has entirely lifted. David and I are thriving in our marriage, building a home filled with genuine warmth, absolute transparency, and fierce loyalty. My luxury public relations firm recently landed 3 massive international accounts, and David made managing partner at his corporate tax law firm. We are successful, secure, and most importantly, completely at peace. Jamal remains a permanent, cherished fixture in our lives. We did not let the destruction of his marriage break our bond. Instead, the shared trauma of surviving my family's manipulation forged an unbreakable alliance between the 3 of us. Jamal comes over to our house every Sunday for dinner. We cook together, we laugh loudly, and we share stories without any fear of hidden agendas or emotional landmines. We created our own chosen family out of the ashes of their deceit. When I look around my dining room table now, I do not see the critical, cruel faces of my past. I see 2 brilliant, protective men who stood by my side when it mattered most. I see the family I actually deserve. If my journey has taught me anything, it is that blood does not make a family. Respect, loyalty, and boundaries do. For years, I allowed society and obligation to convince me that I had to endure emotional abuse simply because the abusers shared my last name. I bent over backwards to accommodate people who actively plotted my financial and public ruin. I believed that if I was just accommodating enough, they would magically transform into the loving parents and sister I always wanted. But you cannot negotiate with toxic narcissism. You cannot love someone into treating you with basic human decency when their entire identity is built on your subjugation. You have to draw a Never set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. Have you ever had to stand up against your own family to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of surviving and thriving. The harrowing journey of Allison, David, and Jamal serves as a powerful testament to a profound yet often difficult truth. Blood relations do not automatically equate to family. Society conditions us from a young age to believe that familial bonds are unbreakable and inherently sacred. We are taught to endure, to compromise, and to swallow our pride in the name of keeping the peace. However, as this story brutally illustrates, toxic narcissism cannot be cured by endless accommodation. When individuals view their relatives merely as resources to be exploited, whether for financial gain, emotional dumping, or maintaining a fabricated social image, the biological connection becomes nothing more than a weapon used against you. The ultimate lesson learned here is the vital importance of establishing impenetrable boundaries. Setting yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm will only leave you in ashes while they continue to complain about the cold. Allison's transformation from an accommodating, gaslit daughter to a fiercely independent woman highlights that choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness. It is a necessary act of ultimate survival. True family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and the ability to celebrate your triumphs without resentment. Sometimes the most empowering decision you can possibly make is to stand up and walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. By severing ties with those who deliberately seek to tear us down, we create the necessary emotional space to cultivate a chosen family, people who stand by us in our darkest hours and loudly applaud us in the light. Healing begins the moment we stop waiting for abusers to change and start taking complete control of our own narratives. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your own life and find the courage to cut ties with anyone who consistently disrespects your boundaries.